Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Lori. Wanted to do a quick video about connecting to higher self and then connecting to other beings of light and higher states of consciousness, how it all works, and a more kind of tangible physical way of looking at it, viewing it. I was talking to a friend of mine today about it, and I thought, wow, what was coming through was so tangible. You could actually physically sort of see how the process works, and so I wanted to share that with you. And I'm also, like I do most of my videos, this is all based on what works for me and how I've been doing it. And I talk to these beautiful beings of light in many different dimensions all the time. So I'm familiar with how it works in my system and for myself. And so I wanted to share that with all of you. By the way, behind me is a Stargate. It's a pretty powerful multidimensional device that this a beautiful man, Prageet, who lives also in Mount Shasta, designed through some sort of channeling that he received from a being that he channels. And I am doing an event this afternoon with 15 beautiful humans that are coming in, and I will be channeling their star families, their soul families, their cosmic families individually for each person. And we'll be doing it in this room with this Stargate in the middle of it. So I'm extremely excited to do this live event, and excited to continue to do these live events for people all over the country and the world. So let me explain the way that we can start to look at communicating with the higher self and these beings of light. So first of all, your physical body, right? You've got a physical capsule around you that's dense, third dimensional. And then you have your light being, your light body inside there. And through that system of light, the higher self moves in. The I am presence moves in. With the I am presence is at a higher frequency than the higher self. And it's a channel. So when we speak about channeling, right, it literally, you can imagine it as a physical channel. Like if we were to reduce the energy down, slow the energy down to a very slow vibration, like the third dimension, like this, right? My coffee, it's third dimensional, it's dense, it's physical, right? Because the energy is spinning really slow. So if we could slow our light bodies down, our higher self's energy down, we would see that there's an actual physical sort of channel that comes into the body. The reason for this channel, the reason for this ability to pull in and bring in these energies and consciousnesses is for us to connect to higher dimensional beings, to connect to energies and consciousnesses that are outside of ourselves, to connect to information, to connect to our other aspects of ourselves that are not just this dense physical form, right? And so when you talk about, or when you hear people say, I channel, or I receive information, or I'm a medium, or all this stuff, it comes through literally a channel into the body. And when it comes into the channel, it moves through the higher self. So when it moves through the higher self then communicates the information to you, right? So it feels like, and when the higher self talks to you, it sounds like your own voice. And again, I'm only speaking of my experience, okay? So I'm sharing about how it feels to me, hoping that it can assist you in being able to open up more and more to this, right? So when my higher self speaks to me, it sounds like my own voice. It doesn't sound like another random weird voice. It sounds like I'm talking to myself. However, I've done a video before about the higher self, right? It's very direct, it's very specific, it doesn't waste a lot of language. It just is a direct piece of information that comes through. Now, when the information comes through the higher self in that channeled space, right? Literally visualizing a tube, a channel coming through, it moves into our third dimensional space. So it moves through our mind and our ego, meaning that it's filtered through the mind and the ego. And when it is filtered through the mind and the ego, that is when we resist. That is when we judge it. That's when we say, oh, it's not true. There's no way that's real. I'm not going to follow that. I'm not going to listen to that, right? That is the ego and the mind filtering the message from the higher self. So the first thing we have to get clear on is again, what is the difference between ego, mind, and higher self, right? And starting to play with that. The ego and the mind are going to hold you back and keep you safe. The higher self is going to push you. The higher self is going to ask you to do things that you're not comfortable doing. Moving, changing jobs, changing relationships, stepping out into bigger platforms, doing more of the work that you came here to do. These kinds of things are what the higher self is going to bring in to us, for many of us, right? And also just don't go there, do this, do that, go this way, go that way, buy that book, buy that vitamin, go get your magnesium, whatever it is that comes into you, okay? So what happens is we start to begin to practice. So we start listening. What voice is that? Is that my higher self or is that my ego, right? Because there's going to be a filtration process. The ego and the mind are going to be loud in the beginning, and the higher self's going to try to get through. What starts to happen is, especially as we're shifting our frequency, so as we shift our frequency, the light inside of us gets a little bit lighter, faster, higher state of consciousness. It becomes easier to hear the higher self, which is a higher state of consciousness. So as we start shifting our light inside of us and it starts to spin, moving faster and faster, we move into a higher state of consciousness, which allows us to have a little bit easier access to the higher self because the higher self is in a higher state of consciousness. So we're capable of sort of the membrane of the ego and the mind, so to speak, right? That membrane aspect of us gets a little quieter just by the natural process of ascension. The natural process of the light moving into us and speeding up is going to allow us to start to hear our higher selves more. Again, I always say this, ascension is a natural process. So really, at the end of the day, there isn't much you need to do in terms of practicing. It's just going to start to happen for all of us, right? So for many of you that are watching this, you might already be like, yeah, you know what? It's true. I kind of hear my higher self more than I did 6 months ago. And I haven't done anything to do that, to make that shift, right? It's like, no, because it's natural. Ascension's natural. The light coming in you is natural. The light speeding up is a natural process. Right? It's evolution. It's the evolution of our consciousness. So you're going to start to hear your higher self a little bit more. How conscious can you be of the higher self coming in? Now, what happens is we all of us have beautiful beings that are vibrating at higher frequencies that are supporting us and around us. You can call them whatever you want. Guides, ascended masters, angels, star family, cosmic family, soul family, whatever you want to call them. God, light, they're around us. They are not just inside of us. They are literally outside of us, trying to begin to assist us, remind us, activate us, and move us. Okay? It's just for many of us. The process of sort of penetrating the third dimensional veil that is around us, the third dimensional frequency that surrounds all of us, kind of like a matrix. It's a very dense veil, potent, thick. And so for these dimensional beings to try to penetrate and access us, it's very challenging. So what do? They use the higher self, because the higher self is already moving through us. The higher self has easy access to us. What is us? Us is our mind and our ego and our physical bodies, right? So we can feel it, receive it. A lot of times when energy and consciousness comes in, we feel it in our body, and then we can feel what we're being told. And then we turn that feeling into words or into action. So what they do is they use the channel of the higher self to bring the information in to us so that we can start to hear them, so that we can start to feel them, right? And what ends up happening is at first, it's just like when the higher self started talking to you, right? It had to move through and sort of find its way through the ego and the mind, right? And you started playing around with that. Well, what happens when these higher states of consciousness, these beings come in, they come through the higher self. So then now you're at another level of deciphering. Now you're deciphering between higher self and these dimensional beings, right? So now you're having to figure out, is this the higher self, or are these the higher dimensional beings? My guides, the angels, whatever, ascended master, right? For many of us, this is a challenge. It doesn't necessarily come easy for many of us. So again, Like we did down here, where it was the higher self and the ego and the mind, and we were trying to decipher. We got a clear understanding of higher self. Oh, okay, higher self's coming in more. I'm hearing it more and more. Ego's getting quieter and quieter. Now you move up a level, and it becomes higher self and these other beings, right? And these other beings are going to filter it through the higher self, so it's going to sound like your higher self in the beginning, right? It's going to sound like your higher self is speaking to you. However, it's a different frequency, meaning it feels different. It has a different tone to it. There's a different energy that's coming through that's not the same as the higher self. And the beautiful piece about learning these steps is before you get there, you're here, you're really understanding your higher self more and more, right? You're understanding what it sounds like, what it feels like. You're listening to it, so then when you do what the higher self is asking you to do, you receive the validation afterwards of, oh my goodness, the higher self was right. The higher self, I was feeling sick and my higher self said, go take vitamin C, go take, whatever it told you to do, and then you took it and you felt better. Or the higher self told you that you needed to move to this town and you need to go look on Craigslist tomorrow, and you did, and then you found a place and it was flowing and easy. Or you needed to buy a new car, and the higher self said, go to this dealership tomorrow, and blah, 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 right? So the higher self is the one that's telling you to move, that's telling you to do these things, and you're listening more and more. It becomes easier and easier. The higher self, the ego isn't saying, don't do that. That's ridiculous. Why are you doing that? In the beginning it does, and then you learn. So now you're at this other level, right? Higher self and these beings. And now you're having to learn. Is it my higher self, or is it these multidimensional beings? Angels, guides, ascended masters, star beings, galactic beings, whatever it is. And you start to play around and practice. Because I can guarantee you, for most of you, there are beings of light that are standing on the wayside, kind of behind the scenes, waiting for you to connect, waiting for you to hear. Waiting for you to say, oh my goodness, I hear them. Or, oh my goodness, I know they're here. I know they're here. I know they're here, right? And it's hard because they are very high dimensional beings. So it's very, very challenging to penetrate this third dimensional veil that we live in. It's not easy. You have to understand, if you were to tear things apart and look at them as in very physical ways, imagine that you as a physical form have an intense veil around you. And to penetrate it is extremely challenging. So these beings of light, the beautiful beings that are supporting us and are here to remind us of what we're doing in a physical form, are waiting patiently for that veil to thin, right? Which is part of the ascension process. The veil thins. And not only for the veil to thin, but for us to begin to open up and expand into more of the frequencies that are coming in through our channel. Opening up and listening a little bit more. Opening up and understanding on a conscious level what's happening. So the other thing that can assist us is being conscious. How conscious can we be of what's happening, how it works? Oh, I have a physical body. I have light inside that physical body. I have a light body. I have a channel of information, of like literally like a freeway system of light that comes down, and the higher self accesses that. All of a sudden I start to hear, feel, experience the higher self. Higher self and ego try to figure out how they're going to work together. Ego's always louder in the beginning. And then I'm starting to hear these other frequencies. Or I know there's other things that are wanting to communicate with me. How do I tap into it? First and foremost, you bring your consciousness to the understanding and awareness and knowingness that they are communicating with you. And then you have patience. You have patience and you ask, I'm ready to hear, I'm ready to hear, I'm ready to hear, I'm ready to hear. And remember that it's going to sound like your higher self in the beginning. It's going to sound just like your higher self sounded like you, right, in the beginning. And then eventually there's a little bit of a understanding that it has a different tone. It's more direct, right? But it always kind of sounds like you. It's the same thing in this level, in this space, when these beings move through the higher self. It's going to sound like you speaking. When these beings that are all around me right now in this room, when they communicate with me, it sounds like it's like a faded sound. It's like somebody speaking from way over here, and it's moving through like a tunnel, and then it's coming through. And when it comes through and filters through my higher self, I am filtering it through my higher self and ego and mind. So it sounds like me. When I speak, when I translate their information, their energy into words, it sounds like my words. So when I'm speaking it to a client, I'm speaking it in my words, the way I speak, the way I talk, because it's being filtered through my own humanness. Somebody else that were to receive that energy and consciousness would perhaps communicate it in a different language or a different way. They might not use necessarily the same words that I'm using, right? It's a consciousness coming in, and then the human body, the human vessel, translates it based on who that human is, right? So there's a lot of times where it's like, oh, that was a really clear channel. That person was a very clear channel. That's because their ego and their mind were really out of the way. And when that conscious energy, that consciousness came through, less of the human was involved in it, or less of the human was translating it. But it still comes through the human. It's still filtered through the human mind, the human ego, the human voice, the human body. It's still filtered through. So if you are wanting to communicate more with these beings, first and foremost, really start to visualize what this channel looks like, that there is an actual energetic channel moving into you. And then begin to realize that it's step-by-step process. So first you're going to understand that your higher self is speaking to you. And the higher self has a totally different vibration and feeling than the ego and the mind. And starting to decipher between those. And as we shift into higher states of consciousness, it becomes easier and easier for us to hear our higher selves. That's the first thing. And you're going to start to hear it more and more. You're going to start to trust it more and more. The ego and the mind are going to get quieter and quieter and quieter. When we shift and move into the fourth dimensional space and into the fifth dimensional space, the ego and the mind aren't going to dissipate. They're not going to go away. It's part of the human structure, but they're not going to play a role, right? They're not going to need to play the role they're playing in the third dimension. There's a really important reason why the human body has a mind and an ego, right? We have to in order to survive. But when we move into higher and higher states of consciousness, fourth dimension and then fifth dimension, you don't need an ego and a mind to survive. You need the higher self, the I am presence, and higher states of consciousness to survive, because there is no survival in those higher states of consciousness. It becomes more energy, frequency, light, right? So you start to learn the higher self ego difference, and then you start understanding, as the higher self is communicating with you, that there are other beings that are going to start to move the energy through the higher self. And it's going to sound like the higher self in the beginning, and then you're going to realize, wait a second, is that higher self or is that somebody else? Is that a different being? Is that a different consciousness? Where does it feel like it's coming from? Does it sound a little bit farther away? Does it feel like it's a bigger collective energy? Does it feel like it's information that is beyond what my higher self would know? So you're digging into the information, you're digging into what's coming in. And remember, what's coming in sounds like your own voice, being dropped in and moving through the ego and the mind as well, meaning that your mind and your ego are going to be like, what is that? Is that you? Is that not you? The ego and the mind are like the little, like the peanut gallery, right? It's like, no, ego, mind. It's like, shut up, right? But you can't quite shut it up. You just have to learn how to integrate it. And so these voices, these beings will come in. And you'll just start to learn. Everybody's going to have a different experience. Everybody's going to feel these beings a little bit differently. And your process is your process. The way you do it is the way you do it. And just because somebody does it some way, just because I'm telling you this is how I do it, it might not resonate with you. You might say, absolutely not, that's ridiculous. None of that makes sense, Lori. I'm not doing it that way. Great. And there may be people that are like, oh my God, I totally resonate with this. I get this. This makes so much sense. And they're going to walk out the door and start to visualize that, right? But no matter what, If you take anything away from this video, remember they're here. These beings are with us. And as we shift into higher states of consciousness, we're going to remember more and more and more. And as we remember more and more and more, as we remember, we're going to hear more, we're going to feel more, we're going to experience more. And it's going to become easier and easier and easier. So if you're watching this now and you're like, I'm going to try this out, I'm going to try to bring consciousness to all this and really use what Lori's saying, right? It may be challenging or difficult. 6 months from now, if you were to listen to this video, you'll be in a totally different space. You'll be like, oh, well, I didn't really do what Lori said, but all of a sudden I'm hearing these beings. All of a sudden I'm connecting to these beings. I didn't really do what she said. It didn't really work for me, but I'm in that space. Somehow I got there. So these are all tips to help you right now where you are. But we're all shifting, we're all evolving, we're all moving naturally. So there will be a time and a place where you will be connecting with them. It's an absolute. It's part of our ascension. It's impossible for it not to happen. It's just impossible. So if you're frustrated or you're thinking it's never going to happen or any of that, just know that it is, right? Just know that it is. And if you're having a hard time connecting with your higher self, know that you will. You will. Bring consciousness to what's coming into your brain. Be conscious of what thoughts you're having. Be conscious of the difference in tone. Be conscious. How conscious can you get of what is coming into your head? What's coming in? What is that voice? The more conscious you can be of your voice, the easier this will be. A lot of us are programmed as humans to be very unconscious, to be shut off, and to just not hear anything. Because it's a lot easier to get through our lives when we just are kind of dumbed down or numb, right? Numbed. We just do our life so that we can survive. And we do all these things to distract us from listening. That's why a lot of times, well, we'll go into that another time about meditation, but meditation can be a hindrance or it can be a good thing, depending upon how you're framing meditation. But a lot of times you don't want to quiet your mind. You kind of want to listen. What is the mind saying? What is my mind? What am I hearing? And it's not the mind, it's the voice. What is my voice saying? And a lot of times what happens is people get into this meditative space and they think they have to quiet everything. And they're trying so hard to get into this quiet space. And it's like, no, how about you just sit and listen? What's coming in? That's what I do in meditation. I don't meditate to quiet anything. I meditate to listen. What the freak is coming in? What am I listening to? What's coming in? What wants to talk to me? I don't quiet myself. And that's how I do it. That's what works for me. So for instance, this morning I laid down behind this thing, or in this thing, in the Stargate, and I listened. I wasn't thinking to myself, oh, let me quiet my mind. If I thought about let me close my eyes and quiet my mind, then all I would be doing was trying to quiet my mind, and I wouldn't be hearing the messages that wanted to come in about what I'm going to be sharing with these people today, right? So I didn't think that. I didn't sit down and say, I'm going to quiet my mind. I sat down and said, what am I hearing? So if we can start to shift the way we meditate and actually start to listen, you might actually hear a little bit more, There is a beautiful power to quieting the mind and sitting and not doing anything and just letting the anxiety of the mind, the monkey mind, quiet, right? There's a difference. There's a difference. When the monkey mind is going and you're like, oh, I've got to pay my bills, I got to go to the grocery store, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this. That's the monkey mind, right? And so if you've got that monkey mind going, it will be harder to hear. But I do challenge you to try and meditate where you're not trying to quiet the mind. Because there are pieces coming in between that whole monkey mind. The higher self is still moving through. The higher self doesn't stop just because the monkey mind's going crazy. The higher self is still with you, still communicating, still moving through that channel, even with the monkey mind going nuts. The higher self doesn't shut up and is like, oh, I'm going to just be quiet now because the ego and mind are going cuckoo. No. The higher self is still coming through. So when you sit quietly and listen, what are you hearing besides the monkey mind? What else are you hearing? I don't know where that meditation piece came from, but Somebody needs to hear it, I guess. Anyways, I hope this helped. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for subscribing to my channel. Like this video if you like it. Share it to anyone that may be wanting to know more about the higher self and communicating with these higher dimensional beings. And don't forget, you're surrounded by beautiful beings of light. And eventually, you all will be communicating with them. Every single one of us. Every single one of you. You'll look back at this video like a year from now, 2 years from now, and you'll be like, holy cow, she was right. I hear them. I feel them. They're here. Anyways, I love you all. Have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, night, wherever you are in the world. And I'll see you next time.